The dinner started at 6, but my sister didn't walk through the door until 1:15, deliberately late, wearing a coat that cost more than my first month's rent. She spotted me immediately across the table and smiled the way she always did when she wanted me to know she'd already won. "Still doing house calls?" she asked loud enough for everyone to hear, setting her bag down with a theatrical thud. She held out her left hand as she sat, letting the diamond on her finger catch the light from the chandelier above my parents' dining room table. "Because honestly, with what we've built at the clinic, I keep thinking you must be exhausted. Driving around in that little hatchback, winter tires and everything." My ex laughed from the chair beside her. He hadn't looked at me directly since they walked in, which was fine. I'd stopped needing that a long time ago. "She's resilient," he said, pouring himself a glass of my father's good Bordeaux. "I'll give her that. Some people just really love the struggle." I picked up my cup of tea and took a slow sip. I did not say a word. Before I tell you the rest of this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to know you best, hit like and subscribe, because this story is for you. I am 30 years old. I grew up in Oakville, Ontario, in a house that smelled like wet dog and floor cleaner, because my mother volunteered every other weekend at the local animal shelter. I have wanted to work with animals for as long as I can remember. I put myself through the veterinary technologist program at a college in Hamilton, graduated with a dean's honor, and spent 3 years working inside someone else's clinic before I finally had enough saved to start my own. And for 2 years after I built that practice from nothing, I watched my sister and her boyfriend, now her fiancé apparently, dismantle it piece by piece and put it in their own names. That was 2 years ago. Tonight was the first time the four of us had been in the same room since. My father stood up near the end of the first course and cleared his throat. I knew before he opened his mouth that whatever came next was not going to be in my favor. My father is not a cruel man. He is just a man who for 30 years has confused my sister's confidence for competence and my silence for complacency. "I've made a decision about the Muskoka property," he said. He didn't look at me. He looked at her and at him, the way parents look at children they've already decided are the future. "Given everything that's happened, and given where things are heading for you two, your mother and I think it makes the most sense to transfer the cottage into your names. You'll have a family soon. You need stability." The cottage had been in our family for 22 years. I had been paying a portion of the property taxes on it for the last 4, ever since my father's pension was restructured, and he quietly mentioned, once over the phone, that the Muskoka bills were getting a bit heavy. I never brought it up. I just paid. I didn't tell my sister. I didn't ask for anything in return. I just didn't want them to lose it. My sister reached across the table and squeezed my father's hand. "That means the world to us, Dad." My ex raised his glass to the next chapter. I raised mine. I drank. Growing up, my sister was always the one people described as sharp. She had the kind of confidence that reads as intelligence in rooms where nobody's paying close attention. She could walk into a meeting, say very little, and leave with everyone convinced she'd said something profound. My ex was the same way. Two people who understood the currency of perception. They were perfect for each other, honestly. I was the other kind. I was the one who stayed late, who read the manuals, who knew every animal in my care by name and by chart. When I opened my small animal clinic in a strip mall near Erin Mills, I did it with a business loan from TD, a sublease I'd negotiated down to something I could actually carry, and a handmade sign in the window that my mother helped me paint on a Sunday afternoon. It was small. It was mine. My sister came to me 8 months in, when the practice was just starting to find its footing. She said she'd been talking to her boyfriend, who had a background in small business development, and that they both thought I had something real here, but that I was leaving money on the table by not scaling. She used words like operational efficiency and brand equity. She said she just wanted to help. I was tired. I was behind on the loan repayments. I let them in. It took 14 months. That's how long it took them to move from helping to owning. They did it legally, technically, document by document. They restructured the incorporation. They moved the clinic's lease into a numbered company. They brought in an investor who was, as I found out much later, my ex's cousin. When I tried to push back, they showed me what I'd signed. A shareholder agreement with a dilution clause I hadn't understood when I initialed it, drafted by a lawyer my sister had recommended. The clinic I built was renamed, the logo was changed, my clients never knew what happened, my equipment stayed, my protocol stayed, I was just gone. My family watched it happen. My mother said I should have read the paperwork more carefully. My father said I should let it go, that family was more important than a business, that these things happened, that I would land on my feet. I did not go to pieces, I went quiet. I took a position as a senior vet tech at a small animal hospital in Etobicoke. I kept my head down, I kept my license in good standing. And I started reading everything I had never had time to read before. Corporate structure, real estate investment, Ontario's Business Corporations Act, secured lending law, the mechanics of how a holding company worked. I had a mentor during that time, a woman I'd met at a continuing education seminar who had started as a clinic administrator and eventually built a regional network of specialty veterinary practices across southern Ontario. She introduced me to two people who changed everything. The first was a financial strategist named Nathan, who managed private equity for a quiet but serious firm in the financial district. The second was a corporate lawyer named Felix, who specialized in commercial real estate and secured lending. The three of us met in a coffee shop near Bay Street on a Tuesday in January. Outside, the temperature was -16, and the wind off the lake made it feel worse. I brought a printed business plan I'd written over the course of 6 months and slid it across the table without saying anything. I let them read. When Nathan looked up, he said, "You've been inside a broken system long enough to know exactly where the cracks are." I said, "I know this market, I know the cost pressures, I know what clinic owners need and what they never get." We got to work. Over the next 3 years, I quietly founded a property management and clinic services company called Northpaw Holdings, incorporated in Ontario under a numbered company. We weren't flashy, we didn't advertise. We acquired distressed commercial properties in suburban Toronto, strip malls, medical plazas, mixed-use buildings along the 401 corridor, and we developed premium veterinary clinic spaces inside them, leasing to independent practitioners at below-market rates in exchange for a revenue-sharing arrangement. We made our money on the back end on efficiency, on scale, on the kind of operational improvements I'd spent years watching get ignored. Within 2 years, Northpaw managed the physical infrastructure for 11 clinics across the GTA. Nathan put together 2 capital raises. Felix kept everything airtight. Nobody connected the woman behind Northpaw to the vet tech, who had once opened a small animal practice in a strip mall near Erin Mills. But here is the part that matters for tonight's dinner. 6 months ago, Nathan brought me a new acquisition opportunity. A commercial plaza in Mississauga had come onto the market through a motivated seller, an estate settlement that needed a quick close. The plaza had 7 units. Most were small health and wellness businesses. One of them was a pet wellness clinic. The clinic my sister and my ex operated. I reviewed the acquisition package twice. Then I told Nathan to move forward. We closed in 43 days. My sister's clinic had no idea who now owned the building they leased from. That was 3 months before tonight's dinner. I hadn't planned to sit across from them this soon. But my mother called 2 weeks ago and said my father wanted to see everyone together, that it was important, that she hoped I would be the bigger person and just come. I came. And now I was driving back along the QEW with the heat on full and the city lights spread out ahead of me, listening to my own breathing, when my phone lit up on the passenger seat with a message from Felix. A loan application had been flagged by Northpaw's subsidiary lending arm, a small business credit facility we ran quietly for operators in our network. The application was for $250,000, business expansion, equipment financing. The applicant was a numbered company operating a pet wellness clinic in Mississauga. My sister's clinic. My ex was the director of record. I pulled off the highway. I sat in a Tim Hortons parking lot and read the full document on my phone. He was pledging clinic equipment, their existing lease rights, and this was the part that made me set the phone down and stare at the windshield for a long moment. A personal guarantee backed by his interest in the Muskoka cottage. My father had just announced he was signing over to them. He was using a property he didn't fully own yet as collateral on a loan he hadn't mentioned to my father. I called Felix. I said before I got a word out. What do you recommend? There was a pause. That depends entirely on what you want. I looked out the window at the parking lot, the yellow sign, the November dark pressing against the glass. Approve it, I said. But draft the covenant language yourself. Bury a domestic use of funds restriction and a commercial property retention clause. All pledged assets must remain unencumbered and within the province. Any unauthorized transfer of funds offshore triggers immediate default and full collateral enforcement. Felix was quiet for a second. He doesn't know we're the landlord. No, I said, he doesn't. I got home to my condo in Liberty Village, made myself a proper cup of tea and sat at my desk. I wasn't living in a penthouse. I had a 2-bedroom condo I'd bought 2 years ago when the market briefly softened and a rental property in Stony Creek. I was comfortable. I was not flashy. I had learned from very specific personal experience what it cost to let people see what you were building before you were ready. Nathan sent me the full lending file an hour later. My ex's technology startup was losing money at a pace that made my stomach turn a little, not from sympathy but from the sheer scale of the miscalculation. He had outside investors pressing him for returns. He had deferred 2 quarters of the clinic's rent through a hardship application that our property management team had approved through standard channels, nobody catching the name until Felix pulled the full file. They had been deferring rent from me unknowingly for 6 months. And now he wanted a $250,000 loan from a company I controlled, collateralized in part by a property interest that wasn't his yet, and a building I already owned. The desperation underneath the diamond ring and the Bordeaux came into sudden cold focus. 2 weeks later, the loan funded. Felix confirmed it had landed in their account at 9 in the morning. By early afternoon, my ex had initiated a transfer, not to cover a supplier invoice, which was what the loan application specified. He moved $180,000 to an account in the Cayman Islands, a move flagged by our banking compliance system within hours. It tripped 2 covenant violations simultaneously, the domestic use restriction and the commercial property retention clause. The default was automatic, clean, and legally airtight. Nathan called while I was making dinner. He moved the money offshore, he said. I know. FinTrack is going to get involved based on the transaction pattern alone. We don't need to do anything. The paper trail does it for us. I turned off the stove. Begin formal enforcement. Document everything correctly. Every notice served through proper channels. Understood. I did not gloat. I finished making my dinner. I ate it at my desk with a cat named Clover sitting on the corner of my keyboard, and I felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for 2 years. What happened next I learned partly through Felix's process notes, and partly from my mother, who appeared at my door 3 days later without calling first, still wearing her good coat, her hands tight around the strap of her handbag. My ex had told my sister it was a banking error. He told my father, when my father called after receiving his own notification about the personal guarantee he hadn't knowingly signed, that there had been a miscommunication with the lender and that he was handling it. He contacted Northpaw's lending subsidiary and was told politely, repeatedly, that the account was in terminal default and no extensions were available. He then attempted to sell secured clinic equipment to a used medical equipment dealer in Brampton without notifying us as the creditor. Felix caught it within 24 hours and sent a cease and desist. My mother sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking, and told me that my father had received formal legal correspondence about a personal guarantee he had no memory of agreeing to. She said my sister believed it was all a misunderstanding. She said my ex called the lender predatory. Then she looked at me. Is there anything you can do? I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the night she told me I should have read the paperwork more carefully. I thought about the Muskoka taxes I had paid for 4 years without saying a word. I thought about the sign she helped me paint on a Sunday afternoon, the little paw print in the corner, that got thrown out when they rebranded. I need to tell you something, I said, and I need you to listen to all of it before you say anything. I told her everything, quietly, without drama. I told her about Northpaw. I told her that her future son-in-law had moved $180,000 to an offshore account, using a loan secured against assets he did not fully control. I told her that the building her daughter's clinic operated from had been purchased by my holding company 3 months ago. I told her about FinTrack and what an unauthorized offshore transfer of that size typically triggered under Canadian financial regulations. My mother did not speak for almost 2 minutes. "You own their building," she finally said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." She pressed her lips together. She was not weeping. She was doing the thing she always did when she'd made a serious miscalculation. She went very, very still. "I should have said something," she said at the door on the way out. "When you lost the clinic, I should have said something then." I didn't answer. I closed the door gently. 2 days later, Felix arranged a meeting, not on Bay Street, in a clean professional boardroom at a mid-sized building in Etobicoke with a view of the parking lot. I chose the location deliberately. I didn't need the architecture. They arrived together, my sister and my ex, with my father just behind them. My ex had dressed up, which struck me as an odd choice for a man 4 days into formal default proceedings. My father looked like he had aged several years. My sister's arms were crossed before she even sat down. Felix's assistant showed them in and left them to wait. I watched them on the monitor from the adjacent room for a few minutes. My ex paced. My sister sat rigid, jaw set, the expression she made when she was afraid but couldn't admit it. My father took the chair at the head of the table out of sheer habit and stared at the documents in front of him. Felix came to stand beside me. "Ready?" "Yes," I said. I walked in without knocking. The room went the particular kind of silent that happens when the thing people assumed wasn't coming finally arrives. My ex was the first to find words. "What is this? Why is she?" I walked to the far end of the table and sat down. Felix and Nathan flanked me. I folded my hands on the surface and waited. Felix spoke first, his voice completely level. He addressed my ex formally by name, and I watched him flinch at the professionalism of it. "You are in default on a secured business loan in the amount of $250,000. You were notified of this 4 days ago. This meeting was requested by your counsel. Today you'll be meeting the principal of Northpaw Holdings for the first time." My sister looked from Felix to me. Something moved across her face, a slow, careful recalculation. "You," she said. "Me," I said. My father set down the page he was holding. I opened the folder in front of me and slid 3 documents across the table. The first was Northpaw's acquisition record for the commercial plaza. Purchase date, legal description, the name of the numbered company that was mine. The second was the loan application with my ex's signature and his representation about the personal guarantee. The third was the wire transfer log. $180,000 moving offshore less than 6 hours after the funds arrived. "I built Northpaw over the past 3 years," I said. "While I was working a 45-hour week at someone else's clinic and reading securities law after midnight, I incorporated quietly because you'd already shown me what happened when people knew what I was building before I was finished." My ex opened his mouth. "You pledged a property interest that wasn't yours to pledge," I continued. "You moved restricted funds offshore the same morning you were posting on social media about scaling to the next level. You then attempted to liquidate secured equipment without creditor notification." I looked at him directly. "And you named my father as a personal guarantor, without telling him what he was signing." My father's voice was very quiet. "Is that true?" My ex stared at the table. "I needed the capital. The startup was underwater. I thought I could turn it around in 60 days, and nobody would find out," my sister said. She said it so flatly that I almost felt something for her. Almost. My father stood up. He was not a man who raised his voice. He had spent decades developing a tone he reserved for moments of genuine disappointment, and he used it now steadily and without anger. "You put my name on a legal document without asking me. You used a property your mother and I kept for 22 years. And you said nothing." My ex had no answer. My father looked at me across the table. There was an expression on his face I didn't have a word for. Something between remorse and a kind of respect he'd never quite managed when I'd actually needed it. "How much of this affects the cottage?" he asked. "The personal guarantee is enforceable," I said. "But Felix will walk you through your options separately. You were brought into this without your knowledge. That matters legally." He nodded once. He sat back down. My sister looked at me. Not the way she looked at me across my parents' dining room table 2 weeks ago, with the diamond ring and the calculated smile. She looked at me the way people look when the performance has been stripped away and there is nothing left to hide behind. "What do you want?" she said. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about every sharp, satisfying thing I could say, every door I could shut on her with maximum damage. "I want the default resolved properly through legal channels," I said. "I want the clinic to operate under the existing lease terms or vacate according to the notice period. And I want our father's name removed from personal liability. Felix handles the mechanics." "And the rest?" she said. "There is no rest," I said. "You made your choices, I made mine. The difference is that mine are documented." I stood up and buttoned my coat. At the door I turned back, I reached into my bag and set a small envelope on the table beside my sister. 6 months of deferred rent, I said. "I'm canceling the outstanding balance. The next billing cycle starts on the 1st of the month at full market rate." I walked out. In the elevator, Nathan looked straight ahead and said, "That was restrained." "I know," I said. "You could have buried them completely." "I know that too." The doors opened. We walked out into a gray Tuesday afternoon, the kind of cold that Toronto does without drama, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed it in and felt, for the first time in 2 years, like I was exactly the right size for my own life. I have learned in the last 3 years that quiet is not the same as small, that building something real takes longer than performing something impressive, that the people who underestimated me were not entirely wrong about who I was. At the time they made their assessment, they were just wrong to assume I would stay that way. The clinic I started in that Erin Mills strip mall had a sign with a little paw print in the corner. They threw it out when they rebranded. I thought about that sign a lot in the years after, not with grief exactly, but with a particular kind of attention, the way you think about the first thing you ever made that was truly yours. I still have animals in my life. I have a cat named Clover who sits on the corner of my keyboard while I work, and has no idea that she lives in a condo owned by someone who was once told she lacked the drive to build anything worth having. She seems completely unbothered by it. And honestly, so am I. If you've ever been counted out by someone who should have been counting on you, I hope this story found you at the right time. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read everyone. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to Furry Revenge. I'll see you in the next one.